I hope have seen a special exhibit presented by the GPO photographers called Israel in Full Image. This summarizes 80 years of the photographic history of the Jewish people, even before the establishment of Israel as a state. Now, ladies and gentlemen, because time is money, I invite you to watch 80 years of Jewish history through the cameras of the GPO photographers in a special 90 seconds 3D presentation. Here it is.
מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל. תורכנו רם המעלה, מר מוחמד אנואר אסאדאת.
תמיד האמנתי שמרבית העם רוצה בשלום, מוכן ליטול סיכון לשלום.
Sentiamo risuonare questa domanda di Dio.
מבקש מכם להתמנות ללא צורך בהפעלת כוח.
מול עיניי עמד הצורך להחזיר הביתה את מי שנשלח על ידי מדינת ישראל לשדה הקרב.
אנחנו 7 דקות בנחיתה, מחזירים את גלעד הביתה.
I would like to thank to Eli Levy, the screenwriter of Israel in Full Image, and special thank you to Avi Ochayon, the head of the GPO photo department and the exhibit creator. And now it is my honor and privilege to invite up to the stage Mr. Moshe Milner, at the GPO photographer, and Mr. Dr. Fawaz Kamal, head of the Arabic department. They are both now retiring after decades of serving the government press office. During the last few weeks, the GPO began a special mission to locate the people from these historic photographs, and we are glad to announce that we succeed in locating the Tzamchanim unit, the paratrooper unit that was a part of the iconic wedding at the Western Wall that was held just hours after the wall was liberated in the Six-Day War. I'm honored to invite to the stage Yoram Barak, Errol Hines, and Yecheskel Satat to grant them a copy of this iconic photo.
Freund David hat wieder nichts drin verdient.
Ja, ja, genau. Aber das ist nicht das Foto von David Rubin.
Ist das sicher?
Ja, ja, nee, die meinen da irgendein komisches Foto. Ist da mit einer Hochzeit.
Ah, okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to inform you about a new and exciting project, our very own GPO News. The GPO News is a special news edition in English that will be launched at the beginning of the new year, hopefully, and will be published over the internet to the entire world. This unique edition will include reports on a wide spectrum of topics, from the daily news that is in the center of the attention in the world to the scientific and medical innovations made here in Israel. I'm excited to invite you to watch a short promo of this GPN News. Here it is.
You're watching GPO News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. So we'll be doing this every week, every single week. Exclusive story here on GPO News. We're revealing for the first time. I can bring you a startup a week if you'd like. We'd like that. Let's do it. These are the stories you probably wouldn't see on your typical media outlets.
I recognize a lot of you from my time working at IBA News and CNN. We're very excited to bring you this new and innovative news show. It's going to be every single week, and it's going to be internet-based to start. And since the GPO is dedicated to enriching your time here as journalists, we're going to provide you with some content that you're not going to really see anywhere else. So all of the content that we produce, we're going to do news packages, we're going to have live studio interviews, is going to be available to you. You can reproduce it, you can put it on your websites, and you can show the world a taste of Israel that's not normally seen. Curious, out of all of you in the audience, what are some of the stories that you normally don't see that you would like to see? Does anyone have any suggestions?
Any tough question to Leah? This is the opportunity.
Someone, one person in the audience, a story that you have not seen on the English media here that you would like to see.
Disagreement.
Okay, since we will have access to things that normal people won't have access to, we're going to really try and bring you some stories that you'll be excited to see. So you'll have to watch, so stay tuned what our first show will be like. Thank you so much.
Who knows Hanukkah song? Zu Yeshuati Lechana Okay, may I take just the opportunity to mention that after the Prime Minister will have his remarks, we will take 5 questions at least. And each person should introduce himself and the media he works for, and please, I kindly request no follow-up questions, okay? That we can get more questions afterwards. Okay, and now is the time to welcome our guest of honor, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Would you kindly rise? Mr. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, diplomats, Ambassador Jeremy Issachar and his wife Laura, distinguished guests of the foreign media. Whether we like it or not, 2014 proved us once again how the small state of Israel still draws a lot of attention and interest from around the world. It may seem like ages ago, but it was just 6 months ago when Israel had the honor to be included in the very first trip of His Holiness Pope Francis. During his historic 2-day visit, and with his unique charm and charisma, Pope Francis captured the hearts of people around the world through the eyes of the hundreds of foreign journalists who covered the historic event from the GPO Media Center. We provided a platform for them to broadcast live to hundreds of countries around the world. The engines of His Holiness plane had not yet cooled when the GPO hosted in Jerusalem close to 200 journalists from the global Jewish media to discuss the importance of freedom of journalism here in Israel. Then suddenly, Israel found itself again in trauma when 3 teenagers were kidnapped by Hamas, in turn leading to the launch of Operation Brother's Keeper. The kidnapping marked a severe decline in the security situation in the country and eventually led to a full-scale military confrontation between Israel and Hamas in Operation Protective Edge. 980 foreign journalists came to Israel to cover the events, in addition to the hundreds based here like yourself. The GPO was a hotspot, as a GPO card is mandatory for crossing into Gaza at Erez Crossing, but we did more than just that. Together with the National Information Center at the Prime Minister's office, we organized dozens of press tours to the south from Iron Dome via hospitals and towns under fire to Kerem Shalom cargo crossing and a special briefing by the British Colonel Richard Kemp. In addition, the GPO, together with the Foreign Minister Affairs, operated a front information desk in Ashkelon during the whole operation with 24/7 availability. We also took care of the press as much as we could on the other side of the border and operated transportation lines between Erez and Hamuda Square in Gaza City. Not everything was smooth or perfect, am I right, Glennis? And lessons were learned for the future to ever improve the GPO's service. And now, our next challenge is the upcoming early Knesset elections. We will brief the press in the coming weeks on the current developments, and on the election day, we will once again host the press for a special elections night in Tel Aviv, watching the exit polls together and speaking to political analysts and politicians. If history teaches us anything, then by the end of 2015, I will stand here in front of you and tell you about another exciting year, full of activities with the best intentions to show Israel in full image. And now, it is time for the reason we have gathered here, our guest of honor, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Prime Minister, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Nitzan. I want to thank you and all the members of the government press office for all that you do, not only for tonight, but throughout the year. I also want to recognize, most especially Moshe Milner. Moshe retired after decades of service as one of the GPO's most prominent photographers. He has documented Israel through his photographs over many years, and I think he actually produced an invaluable pictorial record of the country as it really is, not as it's often portrayed, but as it really is. And I want to thank you, Moshe, for your many, many years of service. For this you have our profound gratitude. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today we witnessed a series of examples of European naivete, and may I add, hypocrisy. The decision of the European Court in Luxembourg on Hamas, the resolution of the EU Parliament in Brussels on Palestinian statehood, and the call from Switzerland to investigate Israel for supposed violations of the Geneva Convention. Now, all these point in the same direction. They point to a spirit of appeasement in Europe of the very forces that threaten Europe itself. Too many in Europe are calling on Israel to make concessions that would endanger not only the security of Israel, but also, paradoxically, the security of Europe itself. Because Israel is the forward position of European civilization. Israel is the bulwark of European values. Israel is a pluralist, vibrant, multi-party democracy. In Israel, there is equality before the law. The rights of all are vigorously protected, of minorities, of women, of gays, of everyone. Only in Israel. In Israel, there is a true separation of powers. Our judiciary is fiercely independent, and we're proud of this. And you as journalists know something that applies to your profession. In a very, very large expanse, Israel is the only country in the Middle East and beyond with a truly free press. No one is incarcerated. No one is pressed. No one is harassed. You can write what you want. You do. You can say what you want. You do. And you can just about photograph anything you want. And you do that too. Only in Israel. And it stands in sharp contrast to what we see in the region around us, in the horrors that afflict human beings there, and the horrors that afflict journalists who cover these savageries. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel is an embattled democracy in a region plagued by totalitarianism, tyranny, and Islamist terrorism. A region where human rights are trampled upon, where basic human freedoms are ignored, where arbitrary violence is par for the course. Israel is forced to defend itself against terrorists who time and again try to target our civilians. This summer, they fired thousands of rockets on our cities. And while they were doing this, these terrorists committed a double war crime. They deliberately targeted our civilians. That's a war crime. And they used their civilians as human shields. That's a second war crime. Yet the focus on Geneva, or the focus in Geneva today, was that Israel must be investigated for war crimes. What a hypocrisy. What a travesty. I ask, where is elementary European integrity? Now, I know that some in Europe say that they are frustrated with the situation in the Middle East. Well, let me tell you a secret. We in Israel are frustrated with the situation in the Middle East. We are frustrated that our Palestinian neighbors refuse to recognize the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own, at the time that they're asking for us to recognize their right to have one. We're frustrated that our Palestinian neighbors continue to incite against Jews and the Jewish state, creating a climate of hatred and violence. We're frustrated that they refuse to negotiate seriously about our legitimate security concerns. And I think all of you know that in this part of the world, there can be no genuine peace without security. For peace will not last if it cannot be defended. The simple truth is that half of Palestinian society has been taken over by Islamist extremists who openly call for Israel's destruction, while the other half refuses to confront the first half. So when Europeans say that they're frustrated, we say, join the club. And I don't believe that frustration can be an excuse for wrong policy. Removing the terrorist designation of Hamas is a grave mistake. Hamas is a ruthless terrorist organization with a proven track record of brutal terror attacks against innocent civilians. By the way, not only Israelis. Hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians who have been murdered by them. Just this year, Hamas kidnapped and murdered 3 Israeli teenagers. It launched thousands of rocket attacks indiscriminately at our children and our civilians. And it celebrated just recently the murder of innocent worshippers massacred in a Jerusalem synagogue and called upon its followers to commit more such terrorist atrocities. Some erroneously believe that Hamas terror is a function of a failed peace process. Well, I'll remind all of you that in the heyday of Oslo, when leaders across the globe were excited about the new momentum of the peace process, hundreds of Israelis were the victims of one of Hamas's most brutal terror campaigns. Now, it was said then that Hamas uses terror to destroy the peace. And it is said now that Hamas uses terror because there is no peace. Well, the truth is that Hamas uses terrorism against Israel because it's a terrorist organization committed to Israel's destruction. It's as simple as that. That's the nature of this organization, and that's its fundamental goal. Now, if anyone had any illusions about that, you could hear one of the leaders of the Hamas this weekend, Mahmoud al-Zahar. He reminded us that Hamas's goal isn't to rule over Gaza or to rule over Judea, Samaria, the West Bank. He said it clearly. Hamas's goal is the total and complete annihilation of Israel and the murder of Israel's citizens. Well, do the self-proclaimed Palestinian moderates confront Hamas and the other Islamist extremists? Unfortunately, they often seem to be trying to compete with them over who can use the most inflammatory language and who can summon wells of anti-Jewish sentiment and anti-Israel sentiment. It was President Abbas himself who spoke seriously, slanderously, of a Jewish threat to the Muslim holy sites. There is no such thing. We keep the status quo rigorously. That's not going to change. We guard the holy sites of all the religions. That's not going to change. And by the way, again, in the broad Middle East, we're the only ones who do so. For Jews, for Christians, for Muslims. In fact, the only place where Christian communities are not persecuted, where Christian communities have not shrunk, they've actually grown fourfold since the founding of the State of Israel, is Israel. It's the only place. So to speak about our attack on the holy sites is not merely a lie. It's just wrong. It's wrong because it creates the wrong impression among Palestinian youngsters, among Palestinians in large, and it produces these waves of attacks from people who seriously believe that we would destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was just a poll taken in Palestinian society. About 90% believe, 85% believe that Israel seeks to achieve such a goal. So this rhetoric has consequences. It forces a change in people's minds and it forces radical and violent behavior. It has to stop. It was Abbas who actually called the Palestinians to use all means to fight this fabricated threat. And it was Abbas who accused the Jews of contaminating, that was his word, contaminating the Temple Mount. Now, the question I raise for you tonight is, does it hold the Palestinian leadership? Does it demand that the Palestinian Authority break its signed pact with Hamas? Does Europe call for an end to outrageous official Palestinian incitement against Jews and the Jewish state? The sad truth is that Europe is largely silent on these questions. And when it raises its voice, it's typically in the other direction. In fact, the European Parliament and some parliaments of EU member states have been calling for the recognition of a Palestinian state. And I ask you, why should the Palestinian leadership demonstrate responsible behavior? Why should the Palestinian leadership jettison its maximalist and extreme positions? Why should it abandon its call to flood Israel with millions of Palestinians? Why should the PA do any of this if its extremist and irresponsible behavior is rewarded time and again by European parliaments? Let there be no mistake. Parliamentary recognitions do nothing to advance peace. Quite the contrary. These declarations merely reinforce Palestinian intransigence, pushing peace further away. And the point that I came here tonight to make, this is the point I close with. There's a simple truth that cannot be ignored. Peace will only come when the Palestinians are willing to confront their own extremes. Instead of embracing the militants, the PAA should fight them. And instead of rewarding Palestinian intransigence, the European democracies should support the one and only democracy in the Middle East. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the state of Israel. Thank you.
Prime Minister will take some questions, 4 or 5 questions. John Kaduma-Malaya. Over the microphone.
I'm Joe Fetterman from the AP. Nice to meet you. Finally.
Well, this is an intimate gathering.
You laid out a very persuasive case right now about Israel's various challenges, but you made no mention of settlement construction. As you know, Israel's closest allies oppose the settlement construction. The U.S., Europe, it was an issue that came up today in Geneva. At the same time, in the past, you have said you oppose the establishment of a binational state. So I'm trying to figure out, there are mixed signals here. You're concerned about this binational state. Your closest allies don't like this, this process of construction, yet Israel continues to build and build at a pace far faster than anywhere else in the country. So my question is, why does Israel continue to build in the face of all this opposition? And what is your message to the outside world by doing this?
The settlement is an issue to be resolved in negotiation, but it's not the issue. The reason this conflict has been going on for close to a century is not because of the settlements. There were no settlements from 1917, since the Balfour Declarations, until really until 1967. So you're talking about a full 50 years. Now, what was that conflict all about? Why were there repeated attacks on Israel time and time and time again? There weren't any settlements. The reason was that there was an opposition to any Jewish presence here and any sovereign Jewish existence here. This is what happened. Now, after 1967, Israel came back to our ancestral homelands, and yes, we have certain claims there, but we always said that we were willing to discuss them around the table. We pulled out of Gaza. We went by the book. Everybody said, pull out, tear out all the settlements, go back to the 67 lines, you'll have peace. We did exactly that in Gaza. Another government did. And what did we get? Did we get peace? No. We had rockets fired on our heads, thousands and thousands of them, for years. This area was taken over by Palestinian extremists, and they say, we continue the battle against Israel. Now you ask them, why are you doing this? To free up the West Bank? And they said, no, to free Palestine. And what is Palestine? Jaffa, Akko, Tel Aviv. That's what the Hamas says in Gaza. So we turned to the Palestinian so-called moderates in the West Bank and we said, well, why don't you repudiate them? Will you recognize the Jewish state in any border? Skip the settlements. If Israel were to do exactly that, go back to, to the textbook statements of tearing out the settlements, going back to the 67 lines and so on, would you recognize the Jewish state? And they refused to say yes. Because the first half of Palestinian society, as I said, calls outright for the destruction of Israel, and the second half refuses to confront the first half and to say, we will recognize the Jewish state. We ask that you recognize the Palestinian state, but we will not accord you a recognition of the Jewish state. And I think that's the heart of the matter. The whole settlement issue is really a result of the conflict, which is turned by dint of constant repetition into its cause. It doesn't make it true. It's an issue that can be resolved, but it cannot be resolved if we don't address the underlying issue, which is the persistent refusal to recognize Jewish sovereignty in any border. And as far as expanding and taking over lands, we haven't built new settlements for decades. We've added housing in the existing settlements, and everybody knows that the Palestinians are using double language. Everybody knows that most of the Jewish population is concentrated in three or four blocks, settlement blocks that take up very little territory. And yet the Palestinians, who always agreed privately that these areas would remain part of Israel in any final settlement, publicly make a ruckus over every apartment that is built here in Gilo and Ramot, which are neighborhoods of Jerusalem. And they know fully well that these are always going to stay in Israel. And yet these are called settlements, as if Jerusalem is a settlement. It's not. I say the issue of the settlements has to be addressed, but it is not the real issue. The real issue that has to be addressed for peace to prevail here is to have the Palestinians finally agree to a state, a Jewish state, and this they refuse to do. I hope that changes, but that's the core issue, not the settlement.
Second question, Walid. Mr. Prime Minister, this is a democracy, so Al Jazeera, second question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, you mentioned all what Hamas did and what Abbas said, but you didn't mention that during the war, more than 2,000 Palestinians were killed in Gaza and hundreds of houses were demolished by the Israeli troops. And your government extending the settlements all the time in the West Bank. How do you want to progress in peace negotiations with the Palestinians, and on what basis? And what will be the reference for such negotiations if Israel is refusing all United Nations resolutions regarding the conflict? And my question also, why you need the recognition of the Palestinians of Israel as Jewish state? Israel is not Jewish state yet? Thank you.
Any more questions? That's a pretty detailed one question. Well, first on Palestinian civilians, no one regrets more the loss of civilian lives than Israel. But we didn't choose to attack Israel with rockets. We didn't place those rockets in the midst of hospitals, schools, residential neighborhoods. This was done by Hamas, deliberately. Hamas actually targeted our cities, our people, our civilians with thousands of rockets while firing from inside civilian areas. And it wasn't that they were just indifferent to the fact that we have to defend ourselves, so we targeted the rocketeers within those places. Who would not? You have thousands of rockets fired on you from inside Palestinian neighborhoods, and you try to target, to pinpoint the rocketeers. And obviously, there are these accidental casualties of war that happen, and they're very different from the deliberate targeting of civilians. Yet the Hamas wasn't indifferent to this tragedy. The Hamas courted this tragedy. They said the more civilians are killed, the more they can play public opinion. It doesn't make that distinction. And I submit to you that Hamas, as I said, is guilty of a double war crime. Because targeting civilians is one war crime, and hiding behind civilians, using them as human shields, is a second war crime. We try to protect our civilians, both by targeting the rocketeers, but also by using an anti-missile system. Missiles to shoot down missiles. We use missiles to protect our civilians. They use civilians to protect their missiles. That's the difference. And it's a fundamental difference, and the responsibility for the tragedies that occurred, and every civilian loss, every civilian death is a tragedy. That responsibility lies squarely at the foot of Hamas. You asked two other questions? That's enough?
Tom Reiner, where are you? Sky News. Okay.
Thank you. Tom Reiner from Sky News. Depending on how things go in March, this could be the last time as Prime Minister that you host a gathering like this.
Oh, that's been said so many times.
Given your platform and your popularity in Israel has been based on, I think it's fair to say, your claim to be a man who can bring security and your claim to be an effective communicator of Israel's position to the West. The situation as things stand now, where there is violence on the streets of Jerusalem that really is almost impossible to prevent in its nature, and you have an international community that is increasingly hearing what you're saying and doing the opposite thing, and there is growing support for unilateral recognition of the Palestinian state. If this is your last event like this as Prime Minister, is this a legacy that you can live with?
Look, I believe the public in Israel knows that I'm the only one who can best defend the state of Israel against, in the face of tremendous challenges. I think the people of Israel give me credit for standing up for the state of Israel, for defending the state of Israel, for pushing back on demands that we make concessions that would endanger our security. I think they recognize all that. They know that I've been instrumental in the great battle to stop Iran from purchasing or developing nuclear weapons. They know that we fought Hamas under my leadership responsibly and effectively this summer. They also know that the Islamist fires are raging throughout the Middle East, and they're trying to penetrate inside Israel, and that we're doing, I think, the best job possible of pushing these back. I think the Israeli public is a lot smarter than some people think, and evidently they do.
Okay, last, where is Igor from Germany? Where? Yeah. Okay, please.
Inge Müller, Frankfurter Rundschau and Berliner Zeitung, German media. Mr. Prime Minister, you put a lot of effort in fighting the recognition, those initiatives to recognize Palestine. But what would be the problem? Or what is the problem? Or why is it so problematic in your eyes just to imagine to negotiate from state to stay on that level? What is so problematic in just defining the borders between Palestine and Israel?
Well, we think that the only way to achieve peace is through direct negotiations and not by fiat, not by imposed resolutions and so on. Because that's the only peace that will hold. That peace has to have symmetry. The Palestinians require and demand a nation state for themselves, self-determination for the Palestinian people. They refuse to give that, accord that same recognition to Israel, self-determination for the Jewish people. The first difference is that they say that any Palestinian can go to the Palestinian state, but if this is not a Jewish state, then Jews will not have the automatic right to come to the Jewish state. Under two nation states, Palestinians can go there and Jews can come here. But they insist on the so-called right of return in which they could flood the Jewish state out of existence. They would just flood it with millions of Palestinians. That's their plan. So I think that this is one of the issues that has to be obviously negotiated. And we've always been prepared to have such negotiations. But I think it cannot be that the Palestinians demand a nation state for themselves and that Israel will not have a nation state for the Jewish people. The difference is that in our nation state, non-Jews have equal civic rights. They have all the rights, and only in Israel do they have such rights. And yet, in the Palestinian state, it's supposed to be ethnically cleansed. A Jew cannot either. If you sell property to a Jew, you could be killed, you could be executed. In Israel, people buy land, buy property. I've insisted on the right of every Israeli, Jew or non-Jew, to be able to live freely, worship freely, purchase homes wherever they wish. This is something that I stand for. So we want the accordance of a nation state for the Jewish people, just as the Palestinians want a nation state for their own people. And I don't see why they keep moving away from that. I want to tell you that on the larger question of peace, peace will only come if Israel is strong. Nobody will make peace with a weak Israel. We know what it was like to be weak. We know what it was like when the Jewish people were a wind-tossed sleep. Our national anthem, Atikva, was written in the late 19th century. The word Atikva is hope. And the hope was that the Jewish people will finally have a state, will have a country, will have an army to defend themselves. This is what we've been able to achieve in the intervening century. We now have a state. We now have one of the most bustling economies in the world. We have a technological powerhouse here. We have agriculture, we have medicine, we have scientific discoveries that help all of mankind. But the great change that has happened to us is that we've been able to defend ourselves by ourselves. This is the key both to our future, this is the key to our hopes, and this is the key ultimately to peace. I will always defend the state of Israel. I will always keep it strong because this is what gives us the true hope for the future. I want to wish you a very happy year coming to you, for all of you, and I hope that we have one of strength and hope and peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the panelists. We have the second Hanukkah by the Cantor of Jerusalem, Gadiel Koltum.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של חנוכה אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. Mismo